What's up, headbangers? On today's episode, I'm spinning the wax with Alexander Jones of Undeath, and we're listening to At the Drive-In's Relationship of Command. Don't go anywhere, it all starts right now. Welcome, my friends, to the very first episode of Spinning the Wax. My name is John Garcia, aka Stay Puffed, the heavy metal marshmallow, the heaviest mallow in the galaxy, and your friendly neighborhood headbanger. In this series, you can expect candid, long-form interviews from guests from all around the heavy metal world, be they artists, managers, PR reps, crew members, or anyone in between. The conversations are centered around one of their favorite records, which we listen to while we chat. My hope is to bring you fresh and engaging insight into your favorite artists in a unique way, while also introducing or reintroducing you to some of the best albums of our time. Personally, I still love listening to albums as the way that I consume my music, and getting to nerd out with other heavy metal obsessives just takes us to some really deep and interesting places. So that being said, my first guest hails from Rochester, New York, where he is the vocalist for the putrid and decaying death metal band Undeath. Alexander Jones takes us through At the Drive-In's Relationship of Command, submerging us into the world of post-hardcore. Alex is an incredible dude and talks about his obsession with this album in his teenage years, how influential At the Drive-In were and still continue to be, as well as how they still don't sound like any other band. We also discuss Undeath's latest album, More Insane, and about how playing live helped shape the record, and how producer Mark Lewis gave Alex a brand new confidence in his vocals during their studio sessions. As will be painfully obvious, this was the very first interview recorded for this project, taped all the way back in May, before there was even any semblance of a plan, name, or anything other than a general concept. Huge, massive shout out to Alex for his time and his patience and agreeing and knowing he was going to be the guinea pig while I built this airplane as it was taken off down the runway, as it were. The conversation you're about to hear is a condensed version of our chat, cut down for clarity and to remove some dead space and things like that while we were listening. If you are interested in listening along to the album in full with us, check out Spinning the Wax's Patreon page, where you can get access to the unabridged chat and more. Details are in the channel description and at the end of the show. Now, please welcome to Spinning the Wax my very first guest, Mr. Alexander Jones.
What is up? Thank you for having me. Very, very, very happy to be here. I'm stoked to talk about angular post-hardcore with you today.
Yeah, dude, this is what we're going to be doing today. We are going to be spinning At the Drive-In's seminal album, Relationship of Command. Is that the appropriate word to use for that album, Alex?
I would say so. I would say seminal. I would say it's their magnum opus for sure. Genre defining, some might even say. Certainly defining in many aspects in my life, but yeah, seminal absolutely fits.
Yeah, and we were talking about this when I initially approached you about that, because you said this is an album that you listen to like regularly for well over a decade, and I assume still like it is still in your rotation at times to this day. But this is a band that really completely passed me by, and I didn't really actually listen to this album until just a few years ago when I was streaming a lot more on Twitch, and I did a thing every once in a while where I would just, the chat would say like, oh, you haven't heard this album, let's all listen to it together. And I would listen to an album for the first time. And metalheads, post-hardcore heads, punk dudes, like everybody across the board was like, Relationship of Command, give that one a go. Why do you love this album so much?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny. I feel like the only people who have heard this album that don't like it are At the Drive-In. but we can get to that later. But
yeah,
why do I love this album? I mean, I feel like at this, I'll start this off by saying I really do think it's excellent. I think it's one of the best albums of its era for sure, of the kind of like coming out of hardcore, sort of like new metal is cresting, but it's maybe reached its commercial apex and we're sort of beginning the downslope, like that whole 97 to 2003 little bracket there. I feel like this is definitely by far the best thing that was released guitar wise in that time frame. I love it because it just hit me at the exact right time. I was ready for it when I was a kid, and I just found it at the exact perfect moment that I needed it. The I love the lyrics. I mean, these days when I look back and read the lyrics, they're kind of like psychobabble nonsense, and it's hard for me to really connect with them anymore. But when I was a kid, I thought they were amazing. The riffs are just fantastic. The pacing and the sequencing of the whole album is terrific. The production, I mean, Ross Robinson recorded this one. People, again, new metal probably associate him mostly with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Doing like Korn and that kind of shit back in the day. But I think this album rips. I think it's just so ferocious on whatever you listen to it on. Yeah, it's just total package. It's just a really remarkable album, and definitely one of the signature ones of my young adult life, I would say.
Yeah, and you also were talking about, it's seminal album, important, like, better than anything else that was coming on at this time. For those who haven't listened to it, the first time, because I noticed this when I listened to it for the first time a couple years ago, you hear so much of like so many bands nowadays that are doing so many things. And I mean, this was what, 24 years ago at this point. This came out September 12th, 2000. And you can just see that like it doesn't sound aged. It doesn't sound like it is out of its time or anything like that. It is just like a very timeless, like doesn't even belong in like you can't categorize it in a time frame or anything like that. And the breadth of bands that you can hear that took stuff from this album throughout is really crazy, because as I was listening to it the first time, I was like, so many bands that don't even have anything to do with each other, yet you can still hear that At the Drive-In sound in their music.
Yeah, absolutely. That was kind of the At the Drive-In story. Like they were kind of a band apart from everybody else, even though they drew from so many disparate influences and had so many disparate peers. Like they were always just kind of out there doing their own thing. They're from El Paso, which is not the middle of nowhere, but it's definitely, as far as scenes go, it's pretty isolated. And I'm sure it was 100 times more isolated back in the late 90s when they were getting started. And I'm sure them as a band would probably point to stuff like Fugazi and like the Discord scene as their biggest influences. But like, so many other bands were doing that too, and they don't sound like At the Drive-In. It really is just kind of this really unique synthesis of 100 different things that occurred at the same time that made them exactly who they are.
Yeah, especially like, and when you're talking about post-hardcore at this time, I mean, what, Jane Doe was just like barely a year after this, or a few months after this, and you know how like important and huge and seminal that album is, yet these two albums sound nothing alike. Nothing alike.
Yeah, and I'm really like, I mean, this is just a maybe lack of education on my part, but I'm trying to think of who their peers would be. Like who? I mean, they toured relentlessly pretty much the entire time they were a band. I'm trying to think of like bands that you could slot them next to and be like, oh yeah, this is like the sister band to At the Drive-In, or like these bands were blowing up at the same time as you can see they were kind of all part of a unified scene. But I mean, I don't know. I think of like Refused maybe, but they're all the way in fucking Sweden or whatever. Like there's smaller bands like Burning Airlines. Maybe there's like some Jade Tree bands out there that are kind of doing similar takes on hardcore the way that At the Drive-In was. But they really were the entire time just kind of like, I'm sure they would blush if I said this, but they really were kind of like pioneers in a big way. And yeah, it's just a very, very special band.
Yeah, well, I think that's a perfect segue into just starting the album. Everybody, if you haven't heard it before, settle in. This is gonna, I'm not gonna say it's gonna blow your mind, but it is gonna at least like, it is gonna at least give a nice little like to your mind, I think, at least. And those of you that have listened to it before, you know exactly what to expect. So from their 2000 album, Relationship of Command, let's get this started. This is At the Drive-In, and this is their first song, Our Carcinal. In your like music metal journey? Because like I'm sure that plenty of people would be like, wait, the singer for Undeath is listening to At the Drive-In right now, what the fuck is going on? But it makes a lot of sense, especially if people know how like eclectic your music taste is. You're not just listening to fucking Entombed and Slayer. But like where was this in your musical journey as far as the bands that you were listening to at the time and the bands that you found because of this album?
Uh, that's a very good question. I was probably like, man, like 13 or 14 when I first heard this. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where that places me in school. I think I was in middle school, maybe like seventh or eighth grade. And I was probably mostly listening to hardcore, just like Minor Threat, Black Flag, like the really early stuff. I was probably listening still to whatever like my dad was into, because my dad was into a lot of punk. So like the Clash, Sex Pistols, stuff like that. So punk and hardcore was definitely like my identity at that point in like a
Cool.
classic kind of sense.
Yeah.
Uh, and this was definitely one of the first albums that I heard that was like my own thing. You know, it wasn't
Yeah.
something that was kind of grandfathered to me. It was something that I discovered myself. And I don't remember how that happened initially, but I do remember the first exposure I had to this album was the One Arm Scissor video, and we'll get to that track in two songs. But
Yeah.
um, I saw that video and I saw just what the band looked like, and I saw, you know, I listened to how insane this music was, and I was just hooked immediately. And I sought out the very first album by them, Acrobatic Tenement, and I listened to that, and I just worked my way up through to the Relationship of Command. And by the time I got to Relationship of Command, they were just my favorite band. And yeah, right off the heels of this, I mean, I was really heavy in like blogging and like file sharing and stuff back then. That was kind of like the de facto way to find and share music online, because this is like maybe the most ancient days of YouTube.
Yeah, this is when you're
And
gonna infect the family computer on with
yes,
LimeWire and Kazaa and everything like that for like a fucking like
absolutely.
Eminem track or something like that.
This is like beginnings of YouTube. Definitely like we're fully in the swing of LimeWire, but pre-streaming. So I think it was on like Last FM or like a similar website. I just
Yeah.
punched in At the Drive-In, and it populates a list of related artists that's like totally algorithmic. But found some great bands that way. You know, from At the Drive-In, like you obviously go to Sparta next, which is I believe his name is Jim, the other guitarist. Yeah, Jim Ward. That's his post At the Drive-In band. Listen to Sparta, Bear versus Shark, Blood Brothers, like all like the weird kind of freaky post-hardcore bands you can think of were what I listened to immediately after this, and that was like my shit forever.
And we are just now starting into Pattern Against User, the second song right now.
Sick track. I'll say Our Arsenal, the first track, is like, to me, that's just to this day one of the best album openers ever. Like the fact that it just opens with solo maracas, like that's just such a big balls move. Like I just love that shit so much. And then
And they put so much extra, like you're going on a journey with this record. Like I would say around the time, you know how Queens of the Stone Age Songs for the Deaf has that, like you're in the radio and like you're driving along the, you know, southern desert of the California coast or whatever it is. This one has a similar feel to that, with not exactly like you're doing a radio thing, but with all the little intros and the creepy ass phone message that's like halfway through the album and everything like that. You know, it's like it provides such an experience throughout this song, or throughout this album, I
yeah,
should say.
it is very immersive for sure. And you know, we were talking earlier about like the lyrical style of this album, and you know, now I kind of look at it and I don't think it's dumb by any means. Like I know a lot of people, that's like their big hang up with At the Drive-In is like the lyrics are just so ridiculous because it's all very anchored in sci-fi and kind of like spy talk and psychobabble and stuff. And
Yeah.
I look at it these days and I don't really feel as much of the emotional response as I did to it when I was a kid. But I mean, I love it. Like on this song, you've got the wormed our way through distant Earth chorus. Like, what the fuck does that mean? But it's like, it's so evocative, and there's just so many great ones great lines on the song. It's just
Invalid Litter
sick.
Department coming up is like that's that kind of like slam poetry song, right? Or
Yeah,
like that one. I think that like I listen to that. It's like, yes, I'm back in high school again.
that's a great one too because it's got that huge chorus, but also the video for Invalid Litter Department is like, if I haven't seen it in forever, but if memory serves, it's all about like migrant women in Texas getting kidnapped and basically like forced into like sex slavery, and it's all about just trying to like uh bring attention to stuff like that. And
Yeah.
they were on a major label at this point. I'm pretty sure they were on Reprise maybe or Version or something like that. And yeah, and the fact that they took one of the videos for a single off this album and they made it about something so important and so like raw, that's just sick. Like, I'm sure a lot of bands would get major label opportunities like this and immediately try to pivot the other way and make their stuff, soften the edges a little bit. But these
They went
guys
the
did the
opposite
opposite
way. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. One Arm Scissor. I know that you wanted to talk about this song and the video for it, so hit me with it, man.
This was the lead single off this album. I'm sure people, if you have like the smallest possible knowledge about After Drive-In as a band, like you're probably familiar with this song, if anything else. This was by far like the closest thing they had to a hit, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Myself included, this is most people's introduction to After Drive-In just because it is kind of like their signature song. But yeah, the video for this one is just a compilation of live footage. It's just live footage and tour footage. And, for somebody like me growing up, I'm familiar with punk and hardcore and stuff like Henry Rollins and Black Flag, and I'm aware of kind of how crazy those shows were and how visceral of a frontman somebody like Rollins is. But that's all in the past. There's nothing really there that's present tense for me. And it's ironic because After Drive-In, by the time I found them, had been broken up for probably over a decade. But they were still more of a modern band. So to see a video like the One Arm Scissor video of a band in not the present tense, but not like so far in the past, doing crazy shit on stage and being unpredictable and violent in like a very cathartic way was really eye-opening for me. And this song is just, it's like deceptively simple. It is just kind of a verse chorus, bridge chorus pop song, but it's couched in all of the At the Drive-In style and ephemera. And that's just one of the many things that makes this album so great, is that it is kind of there's like an illusion of complexity running through the entire thing, where Omar's riffs and can be so crazy and the production can be so high intensity at all times and the lyrics are so inscrutable, but they're really just kind of playing straightforward rock songs the whole time. And yeah, it's just that's the beauty of a song like One Arm Scissor, and that kind of speaks to the beauty of the whole album.
Yeah, because it's got that da 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 like that. It's got that catchiness in it, but then you're talking about that like right before that in the earlier the song, we had that like keyboard thing that was kind of like airy and echoey that goes through. And it is like it lends itself kind of what we were talking about before. Also, is you're talking about the sequencing of this album where it's so hard for bands to do to make every track feel like a different experience, but yet the whole album experience also feels cohesive in like one. And I think this is one of the reasons why this album specifically has been able to stand the test of time, is because you really do get your own experience through every single track that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is definitely something that's overlooked these days. This is kind of like one of my boomer opinions, I guess, but
please hit me with it. We're listening to a full album. Nobody does this anymore. I'm an ancient grandpa, Alex.
I mean, this is how I still listen to music.
Same.
I still listen to albums front to back. Like,
yeah,
all you hear these days is the importance of singles and how, like, before you even mention the new album, like, you got to drop like 2 or 3 singles at least that are completely standalone from the record. And I don't know, maybe there is some validity and credibility to that. I'm sure there is. I'm sure the eggheads have that all figured out. But to me, like, the bands I fell in love with, the music I fell in love with, the stuff that really shaped me creatively as a person, all that stuff was, the experience of sitting down and listening to a piece of music like an album front to back.
Yeah.
And the product, so to speak, was sold to you that way because that was the way the band intended it.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, at least most of the bands that I really liked, it wasn't just 10 to 14 songs that had nothing to do with each other. It was all a singular experience that was meant to be listened to in a specific way. And that's not a revolutionary concept. Bands have been doing it since the fucking AOR era. Like
Yeah.
that's just kind of old hat at this point. But like we were saying, the way that people listen to music these days, it might as well be a revolutionary concept, because I don't know how important that is to kids, especially when an album is just a vessel to put 28 songs on so you can jack up your streaming numbers.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you're hitting basically at kind of like the ethos of why I wanted to start this project and why I wanted to just like bring people in to listen to albums, because like I do agree, like that is how I listen to albums as well. And I know, like, I'm not saying that I don't, listen to singles, or I don't have a playlist that I shuffle when I don't want to be bothered to like sit down and enjoy something all at once. But like I was the very same when like I want, to kind of escape for a little while. It's just like, if I don't want to read a book, if I don't want to, play a game or a movie, it's just like put on the headphones, close your eyes, and just transport to whatever dimension you want to be in, whether it's like the fucking doom dimension, the fucking death dimension, or the classical dimension. I don't even know. But yeah, I mean, like, I do think that the the CEO of Spotify would tell you that albums are dead and doesn't need anything anymore. But we're also seeing a huge spike in like vinyl sales, right? And you're not putting singles on vinyls, you're putting albums on vinyl. So I do think that there is at least, I mean, sure, in the grand scheme of things, maybe albums aren't as important as they used to be, but I think for people like you and me, people who consume music and are moved by music and are impacted by music, and more importantly, are going to spend their money and their time and their, brain power on music, I do think that there is at least still an appetite for that is never going to go away. And I hope that bands don't be like, well, we're just going to write 10 songs at 10 different times, put them in, and there you go, that's your album, because that fucking sucks, dude.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm not so insecure that I can't look at the state of music and be like, these fucking kids, like they don't get it.
Yeah.
There's obviously a large part of me that pines for the days where listening to an album front to back was the only option. But like, also, I can see that if that's not important to some people, it's not important to some people. It doesn't bother me, but the way that I choose to listen to music, the way that I get the most value out of my listening experience is still the album, is still sitting down and listening to it front to back, and then going back and revisiting the songs that I like the most after the fact. But, I will say, all personal biases aside, and this is just the way that I kind of view the way that people discuss music and the way that music is promoted, like calling something an album, like the release of an album still carries a kind of like psychic weight to it, and maybe that's just me overly analyzing and falsely interpreting things. But like when an artist, still, even somebody like Drake, or somebody who's just massively popular, like Dua Lipa, who doesn't need to release an album, they could just coast on singles for the rest of their lives.
Sure.
When they want to make a statement, when they want to create something that can be released and have some real weight and merit behind it, and isn't just like radio fodder, they still put out an album. And to me,
100%.
the fact that they don't have to do that, but they still opt to as an artistic choice, shows that the medium is still alive and well, even if it isn't on the forefront of people's minds.
I agree 100%. I mean, look at earlier this year, Taylor Swift, and she did that last year too, which is like, it's like an event type of deal. Is like, no, it's not just this, like, now, and granted, I mean, she's just capitalism incarnate at this point. So it's just like, here's more stuff to buy. I personally, like, I understand bands that, want to do singles or EPs, or like, that's just like the nature of how things are going to go. And if you're not in a mindset to create an album as a band, don't create an album as a band. Just do whatever it is that you want to do as artists. But I just think that artists that want to remain relevant should want to do albums, because as time goes on, that's what you look back on and know.
Yeah, and there's something to be said for creating a catalog, right? Like, I love when I discover a new band or artist or whatever, and I can look and search them on the internet or whatever, and they've got a whole compendium of albums for me to listen to. And then, if it's a well-loved band, you talk to people who have been following them for a long time, and
Yeah.
they'll point you toward all the different eras. Like, okay, the first four are like this, and then this weird shit happens, and then they lose this guy, and then it's like 5 and 6 are the weird period, and then it like starts to get good again. Like, I love that. I love that journey of discovery and like the arcs that come with albums being released over time and people kind of like creating a canon with their own band. And you sort of get that with singles, like if that's because I know a lot of electronic musicians and dance people and people who kind of operate in that space, like that's way more of a singles heavy area. You don't really think about people making dance music or whatever, primarily releasing albums. It's more just about like the tracks. But even with that, there's some, it's almost the same kind of mode of thinking as albums sometimes. I don't know. I have no idea what I'm talking about right now.
Dude, we're two idiots, morons with like no control of the world, be like, this is how you fix the world. So like, yeah, of course. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about either. I'm sure that there are people listening to the radio right now. It's like, singles rule, you fucking boy. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I'll tell you one thing. With the new Undeath album, when we were very early on in discussing like how we wanted to approach it, we were briefly presented with the idea of doing like 2 singles first that had nothing to do with the album, and then dropping the album, and all of us uniformly were like, fuck that.
I'm gonna like virtual high five right now. Yeah, I love that.
Maybe that'll be the biggest mistake we've ever made, but I feel very comfortable with that decision right now.
I think that Undeath is at a point right now where just like if you drop anything, people are going to be interested and intrigued, but also just like, know your audience a little bit. And I do think that there are a lot of death metal fans that would be even more passionate about this conversation than we are right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, this definitely comes with a share of faults, but the way that I can't help to kind of look at like the trajectory of our band is like, would Cannibal Corpse do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, if I find myself asking, like when I'm thinking about like a creative decision or a like promotional decision or whatever that Undeath makes, and if I find myself asking myself the question, would Cannibal Corpse do this? Generally, the answer is no.
Yeah.
And that tends to be a good thing.
Which is, how lucky were you to still have them as like a guidepost in metal, and they're still making fucking incredible albums to this day, dude.
Oh, absolutely, dude. They're even better than Acid Drive-In, I would say.
And I was like, shit, I should have done 2 of the Mutilated for this one. Fuck.
I feel like there's more to talk about with this record, though. With Tomb, it's like, you're just going to get me sitting here for 35 minutes being like, this is sick.
Yeah.
This is sick.
It's basically
it.
Yeah. Yeah, so we did just pass Invalid Litter Department, but I had the lyrics pulled up to this one because it literally was what we were talking about. Like, intravenously polite, it was the walkie-talkies that had knocked the pins down as their shoes gripped the dirt floor, the silhouette of dying. What are we even talking about, Alex?
Yeah, he's just like spitting on this song. It is just slam poetry. And yeah, I mean, that whole dancing on the corpse's ashes refrain, like that's hard as fuck. And then you get to the chorus and he's talking about, on my way, nails broken, fell into the wishing well. Like that's probably my favorite chorus on the whole album.
It's so fucking sad, dude. It's just like depressing as fuck.
Yeah, that's a real heavy track. And now I think we're on side B, right? We're on Mannequin Republic.
I have a lot of strong feelings about what I personally dub as spaghetti core, which is when bands just throw shit at the wall and be like, if you don't like it, you don't like music type of shit, right?
Yeah.
And I can tell that there have been a lot of bands influenced by this that have gone on to do stuff like this, but this does not feel like they're just throwing shit at the wall. This is just like a cohesive unit, even though it's kind of all over the place, especially this song in particular.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is definitely one of the most like jump the fuck up tracks on the album. Like, there are parts in Mannequin Republic that to me, when I listen to them these days, like border on pop punk. Mm-hmm. And I think if I had told myself that when I was 14 listening to this for the first time, I would have like slapped myself in the face.
I would have kicked my own ass.
Yeah, it's like, this is not pop punk. This is the heaviest shit that's ever been made. But it kind of is in a cool way. And you get that cohesion where they can pull influence from pop punk and they can pull influence from hardcore and punk and screamo and whatever the fuck and make it all into their own thing, because they have the benefit of having been a relentlessly touring band with mostly the same members, I'm pretty sure, if not all the same members, for like 5 or 6 years at this point by the time they made this album. So like they have the inter-band language where they're able to draw from all these different styles, and none of it feels forced. None of it is like, oh well, this guy wants his voice hurts, so we're gonna put this part in, or like this guy feels like he's underrepresented, so we're gonna put this part in so he can really shine. It's all like, it all works in a way that only really good bands can pull off.
Yeah, they know that they need to write stuff that serves the song and not like anybody's egos or anything like that. It's just like, we're here for the music and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, now we're on Enfilade, which is the guy talking in the Ransom voicemail at the very beginning is Iggy Pop. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, I didn't actually, but when I was like looking at the lyrics and kind of looking at everything, I see it right here. It says Iggy Pop on there. But
Yeah,
this is the scariest part of the record. Like all of a sudden you're just unsettled and like uncomfortable and you don't know why. And then you have that weird voicemail into this like almost like Rage Against the Machine kind of sounds like coming in here.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was younger and this was like, I listened to this album every single day, this was definitely my least favorite song.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't tell you why. I just think like I didn't find it as gripping as the other ones. Like, I think maybe I needed more immediacy from it, which you get from stuff like Mannequin, stuff from like Sleep While Capsules, One Arm Scissor, and this song is definitely a little bit more of a slow burn. But
yeah,
I was listening to this yesterday when I was kind of getting ready for this, and I mean this chorus is just irresistible. Like it's like, I just love the groove. I love how bouncy it is. It just, the payoff is so good in this song.
And the lyrics too: sacrifice on railroad tracks, freight train coming, just
freight
like
train coming.
And there's that bounce again.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is the one with the
those hand claps.
So yeah, dude, and we were talking about this on Instagram. Like, dude, I'm a sucker for hand claps. Like on the last Carcass album, their song that has the hand claps in it, lost my fucking mind. But this one, like, yeah, it is a slow burn. And again, going back to the sequencing about this, like there are albums that you listen to and you're like, I don't know if that was the right decision. Kind of slows down. You were talking about that immediacy. But then, like, you need this little bit of a break in this album, and then it ramps up to just, like, another, like, really riotous type of feel. So it really isn't as much of a slow burn as you think. First, it just takes just a couple of listens to get through instead of, like, 10 or 15.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, I going back to sequencing, like, I think this song is just perfectly placed in the album. Like, it really is kind of a breathless stretch of songs from Arc Arsenal all the way down to Invalid. And even Invalid, like, yeah, that's the one with the crazy slam poetry verses, but like that makes up for maybe the lack of musical intensity for just like the emotional intensity, like the heft of it. And like that's a fucking bleak song.
Yeah.
And then going straight from that into Mannequin, like that is a pretty rowdy one. So like, you need a song like this there, and you're right. It isn't as much of a slow burn as you would think, but it definitely has more room to breathe than a lot of the songs we've listened to have had.
And literally, as you're saying, room to breathe, we get this kind of bridge interlude area with what is this? It's like a keyboard or something like that.
It's like some calypso stuff. Like, it's just.
And now we're building it up with the hand claps again, and you're just like, I want to go.
Yeah, and they run this chorus back like 2 more times. Like, it's perfect. It really is just kind of like that, like a victory lap kind of thing. Like, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm sure this is probably like a stupid question. They haven't ever been around for you to even be able to see them live, have they?
So they did a reunion in like 2012. I'm gonna look this up
because they had an album come out in 2017 or something like that, right?
That was it. They did a reunion right around then, and they never played anywhere near me. I don't think. I think maybe the closest they played to, I mean, I was probably living in Rochester, was probably like Philly or something, and I didn't go because it's still a long drive, and also like that album is so bad, the reunion one.
Yeah.
like no disrespect to Cedric and the boys, but like, man, that shit just sucked.
I haven't heard.
I
I do want to listen to it at some point just to be like, I won't go from Relationship of Command to that one though, because I feel like I'm just setting myself up for failure on that one.
I mean, bro, like I literally used like I love this album so much. I used to sit around and like literally fantasize about what it would be like seeing this band
Mm-hmm.
and just like them walking on stage and opening with our Arsenal and like the maracas and everything. And
Yeah.
I would daydream about the possibility of even seeing this band live. And then when actually presented with the opportunity, they released music that I hated so much. I said, "Nah, I'm good."
just wrote it for you. Oh man, that sucks.
Maybe that's just youthful arrogance on my part. Like I'm sure if I got the opportunity to see them these days, I absolutely would. But yeah, I mean, also like when they came out with that reunion album, I was kind of like I hadn't really actively listened to them in a while, so I wasn't quite as incentivized to see them as I would have been when I was 14. But yeah, never saw them. I would love to these days.
That last song, which is such like, at the very end, you're talking about they knew what they were doing. That was like meant to be live. Like there were going to be shoes and hats and pants and fucking cats and everything just flying in the pit. So I didn't know if you had experienced that live or not, but kind of something that you were said earlier as far as like, when this album came out, they had been doing stuff for a while. They had been touring and playing and like gotten to know each other as a band. You were just talking about, I know that you very recently were recording the third Undeath album, and I'm not going to ask you specifically about anything on it, but I always, in my mind, third, fourth albums with bands are so important because they've had time to like gel together and like kind of find their voice and make the mistakes and tour and see what works live. How did you find that kind of journey when you went from, okay, we have the Undeath demo, we have Lesions of a Different Kind, now we're getting out to play and now we're finding what works and what doesn't? In your experience, how was that for you when finding out like how Undeath worked live and how you then maybe wanted to tailor your writing or not to that?
I mean, yeah, that's a really excellent question. I like stuff changed a lot. When we like things happened in such quick succession of one another for like right up until Rise from the Grave. Like, we did the demos and then we pretty much did Legions like immediately off the heels of that. And by the time we were done recording Legions, we had like half of Rise written, and then we recorded Rise and the tail end of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like we could have played any shows around Legions. And the first tour that we had ever really, like first real tour was that Black Dahlia Murder tour.
Yeah.
And that was what, like September of 2021?
Yeah, it was after, it was like later in the year, but it was still 2021, which now it feels like 1,000 years ago at this point, right?
Right. And like we recorded Rise in, I want to say like March, April of 2021. And we didn't play any show. I think we played like 2 shows between that and the Dahlia tour. So we're talking like both demos and both full lengths. We like a total of maybe a dozen shows.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's crazy, right, dude. Because I knew it was quick and there was a lot of stuff and you were in the pandemic thing where you couldn't play, but I didn't realize it was like that many. That's crazy.
Yeah, and it was like I said, it was just everything just happened back to back to back to back to back, and then when we finally got Rise out, it was just like that was really like the touring that we did around that album was really like in the grand scheme of things, I think the first opportunity that we really had to kind of like be a band almost.
Yeah,
because at this point it had been like either writing in lockdown or playing local shows and stuff. And, now we have this second album, we can actually tour off the back of it. And, we're getting these opportunities to travel and stuff. And like, we learned so much. Like in the touring that we did off of Rise, like, I feel like my voice opened up so much. Like, I think everybody just got way more comfortable in their style of playing. I think we just got so much tighter as a band, like live, and then coming in and starting this new record, I definitely went into that experience thinking like, well, I know what I can do as a vocalist, or rather, I know what I can't do because I had just figured out, in the studio setting with the last few records, I didn't try certain things like in certain registers. Like we're not talking about clean vocals here. We're talking about, you know, like guttural stuff and like piercing high stuff. I just never really tried doing that on the first two albums because I never had an opportunity to go for that stuff live.
Yeah.
So I went into this new record thinking like I can't do that shit, and then left it thinking like, well, I can, you know, I can do all of this stuff because it turns out I was able to pull all of the experience I had playing live and put it in the studio setting. So like we learned so much, and I really do feel like this new album is kind of like the first real encapsulation of like the quote unquote undeath experience.
Amazing. And that gets exactly what I was saying as far as like, you know, that experience that you built to kind of find your voice, because it may not be the fact that a band can't tour after their like first album or something like it might be that they're touring but then they're trying to figure everything out, or then they lose some members and then get someone that like really knows what they were going for. But I'm really happy to hear that, dude, especially because I think I remember you posted when you had wrapped up recording on that, talking about how much the producer pushed you and how confident that you were feeling, and just how like you had this like kind of second life or second wind after getting out of the recording sessions for that one, being like, man, we were just ready to fuck shit up.
Oh yeah, dude. Like this is like I don't know. Like I hate when you read interviews with bands and they're like, "This is the fucking best thing we've ever done, man." Like if you're a fan of X band, you're gonna love this one. Like, but I really, I really honestly feel that way about this record. Like, it's just this to me is like the best album we've ever made by so many margins. Like, it's everything that I feel like we're good at, just turned up so much. Like everybody's performances are just air fucking tight. Like I am so much more comfortable and confident on this album than I have been on the last two. You know, like the songs as just songs are better. Like it's just like the thing just fucking rules, and I'm so excited for people to hear it.
And I'm excited to hear it, man. And as just a fan of the band and as a friend, like I'm so happy just to hear that you're into it, because yeah, and like it is a cliche. Oh, this is our best album ever. We've never, but like also at the same time, like you want the like you don't want fucking people to be like, yeah, well, we kind of did some stuff and like it kind of sucks, but it's kind of cool. So like go out and buy it. Like,
Catch us on the next one.
Yeah, exactly. But like also at the same time, like you want artists to believe in the stuff that they're putting out and like be stoked about the stuff that they're putting out, because like if you're not stoked about it, why should I be?
Right. Talking about like Mark pushing me and stuff, you know, like just back to App of Driving, like they did this with Ross Robinson. He kind of has a reputation in the production world, I guess, for like making singers cry and shit, and like throwing chairs against the wall. Not very nice
to Jonathan Davis, is from what I could tell.
No, like, but so like when I say he pushed me, I don't mean like that. I mean like, you know, I went to the recording and we would start a song, like one of the very first ones we did, and you know, get like a line or two in, and Mark would be like, "You should try this really high," and I would be like, "Well, I can't do that," and he'd be like, "Sure, you can," and you know, just 2 or 3 takes of trying it, and it just like that just opened up this whole new register. And like it was just that kind of gentle encouragement from somebody who like Mark Lewis, who, you know, he's got the track record, like he's got the pedigree, he's worked with people, he knows the performances he wants to get and like how to coach them out of people. And just having like I you know, Scoops, who did our last record, like he's great, and like nothing but positive things to say about him, but having that specific experience with Mark for this album was just so like immensely beneficial for me, not just like performance wise, but psychologically, you know?
Isn't it crazy just to have someone in your corner to be like, yeah, you can do it? Like, not even like, yes, you can, like, you need like try to like coach you up or anything, but just like, no, yeah, like you can do it. Like, I believe in you, go for it. And you're just like, wait a second. I can. And then you believe in yourself. You're like, what the fuck? Why did I not think I could? It's just like, and I think that's why it's so important to try and surround yourself with people that are like, you know, a positive impact on your life and want you to succeed and everything like that. Because like, look at that. You went from like, no, I can't do that, to being like, oh, fuck, yes, I can. And not only that, I'm going to do it more often.
Yeah. And, you know, and then it just opens up all sorts of other possibilities. Like, you know, it's like, well, if I can do this, like, now I'm thinking about going back and playing older songs live, and I'm like, I should add this to it, or I should like mix up this part a little bit just to keep it fresh. You know, it's like and I can't stress enough, like we're talking about screamed vocals here. We are not talking about
You're not
clean
entering your Bruce
vocals.
Dickinson era where you're gonna be like Undeath.
Like that is never gonna happen with this
Uh,
band. But yeah, like it really just I kind of like ignites a whole new sense of excitement about like recording music. Because to me, if you had asked me at any point before recording this album, like if I had a least favorite part of being in a band, I would say recording
well,
100%, because it always was just like a punishing experience. And this time around, like recording now might be one of my favorite parts. Like, I don't know.
we just finished Cosmonaut. I know, like we started like running through the conversation for a little
Yeah,
bit.
we are on the last official song on the album now before the bonus tracks. Those bonus tracks are like probably my favorite songs on the
Oh,
album.
really?
Yeah.
Fuck yeah. Cosmonaut, which we just listened to, is one of my favorites on this one. Just
That's a
because
sick
of
one.
that guitar line that opens it up and then the drums that go all the way through. But we were talking about Quarantined when we were like setting this up, because like legitimately the day before I had asked you if you wanted to come on, that came on my just shuffle playlist, and I was like, fuck yeah. It always reminds me of Space Grass by Clutch, with just the way that the bass starts and the kind of like psychedelic stuff that they have. If you were to play them for me, like without me knowing what was going on, I always am like, yeah, it's like Space Grass, let's go. And then it goes different. They're like, oh shit, no, this ain't Clutch.
Yeah, Quarantine these days is probably my least favorite song.
Mm-hmm.
I just think like I get why it's there. I think it's just a nice, more like atmospheric piece that kind of leads us into the final, two album punch from Cosmonaut and Non-Zero. But
Mm-hmm.
like these days, it's such a slog, and yeah, I don't know. I've never really been crazy about that song, but I do like the backup vocals in the chorus where Jim's like, "I took over Java."
Yeah.
Like, I think that's sick.
Yeah, it is sick.
But yeah, Non-Zero, I mean, this song's great.
It's very Bowie-esque, isn't it? Like, especially right here. I don't know. Maybe I'm hearing things weird. I don't know how much you listen to David Bowie. I listen to like some bits in here and there, but like this bit right here is like if you put David Bowie through like a Warbler 90s alt rock like filter or
Yes,
something like that.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I love there's some great Cedric isms on this track, like proto culture, null and void. Like I don't know what he's getting at here, but this is like kind of a beautiful song. Like I really like this one, and I understand why the album ends here officially,
Mm-hmm.
but I strongly believe that the last, like the bonus tracks that we're going to get to in a second, should be like official canon on this record. And I think the actual last song to me has always been Catacombs. I mean, I remember when I first heard this, I don't know where I got it from, but I'm pretty sure it was just like a zip file or something of this album. That was how I had it forever. Like it was just MP3s that I downloaded, and it came with the bonus tracks. And I didn't realize that those weren't like official album tracks until years later. And I remember when I discovered that Non-Zero Possibility is the actual last song on this album, I was aghast. Like,
It's like, no, couldn't be.
so what were they thinking?
But like I also do understand, because if you had not heard the bonus tracks, like this sounds like an album closer. So like I do get kind of like what you were saying. I get what they were going with that. But yeah, how many, going back to like LimeWire and Kazaa, how many album like track lists are fucked up in our brains because someone like uploaded one track or mislabeled it?
Dude, there was such an art form back in the day of downloading albums off LimeWire or whatever,
Yep.
and you would plug them into your medium of choice, whether that was like iTunes or whatever, and then you would have to go through and all the track listings, and you have to correct all the spelling mistakes
Yeah.
from the pirated MP3s, and then you would have to go on Google Images and find like the highest quality album cover so
Oh,
you could attach that
dude,
to the files.
you're bringing back like Vietnam flashbacks for me. I specifically remember a time in college where I worked. I was a photojournalism major in college, and I worked in the photo lab through most of my time in college. And a lot of that was just like being in the lab for 2 or 3 hours at a time to be able to help whatever like students are in there with whatever they needed, right? So you get homework done or whatever. I remember specifically one day I was like, all right, I got a 3-hour shift. I am organizing my iTunes today, baby. And just like, I had like 2,000, 3,000 songs, whatever they were, but like adding the genre tags, adding all of the right spellings of everything, adding the artists and everything like that. And it's like, again, this is our most like boomer conversation right now. It's like kids don't know what it's like nowadays to
You have to work.
your
You have to
music.
work for this shit. Yeah, man. I mean, I like my iTunes back in the day was so meticulously curated.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean, that stuff is just gone now. It's on some decaying hard drive somewhere. But like, I spent countless hours just making sure that all the genre tags were exactly right. Like everything was everything was organized alphabetically by artist and then by album, and
Yeah.
like everything had to have like as high quality of an album cover as you could possibly find. Like I spent so much time making sure that stuff was perfect, and then so many hours just being like, is this lo-fi black metal, or is this like, or is this more Icelandic black metal?
Is this dungeon synth or dungeon haze? I don't know.
Like that stuff really mattered when I was 13 years old.
Yeah, it's funny how like after you get older and start playing in bands or just like listening to more music, you're like, I don't give a fuck. Like whatever the artist calls itself, it could be like fucking blackened death grind pop for all I care. I don't give a shit.
Dude, I was so much more of a principled person when my fiance met me. Like I still had an iPod Classic, like 180 gig, and Spotify and Apple Music was in full swing at that point.
Yeah,
and I just refused to take that plunge. I went on. I'm surprised she like even agreed to date me, because I went on like so many insufferable rants about how awful streaming was back then, and
Yeah.
eventually like I kind of wore down and went with the times and haven't looked back since. But I miss those days sometimes, man. I can't lie. I miss having just like my phone in one pocket and my iPod in my other pocket, and like ne'er the twain shall meet.
You could just listen to music without having to be online and be sad all the time.
Right. And that there was a purity to that I do miss sometimes. But this fucking song, man, extracurricular, this is a great one.
It's like he's falling off a fucking building.
The weak are supposed to die, what he's saying there. And then he's talking about a lighthouse.
Well, all right. What a cheery album.
Yeah, this is a nice breezy listen for sure for your first episode.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, we're not listening to Lingua Ignota yet. I'm sure that's going to come up at some point. We're just going to be like by the end of it. But I think, again, getting into albums and longevity of them and everything like that, like never in a million years are you going to get through this album thinking like, oh yes, I understand everything that they're talking about, and I've like, processed everything. It is one of those things where you just have to go back and listen over again, and then like you're saying, go find the lyrics and read them.
Like no art or music is entirely divorced from context, right?
Sure.
Like you can't pretend that something exists in total isolation from everything else, because it's just not true with anything. But that is kind of how I feel about At the Drive-In sometimes, because like we were talking about earlier, they obviously took so much influence from bands like Fugazi and all the same bands that were coming up around the same time as them did. But I don't listen to At the Drive-In and I go, oh, there's like the Fugazi part, like there's the like that's the heroin part, that's the fucking cave-in part or whatever. It's like like I and there's nothing wrong with that. Some of my favorite bands of all time, I can listen to them once and I can immediately pick out like, okay, these guys love this band,
Yeah.
But with At the Drive-In, they do kind of exist by themselves, like out on an island in a sea of bands that we're all pulling from the same influences as them. And I think that's just one of many things that makes them really special, is that they were able to incorporate that stuff in a way that was like almost transparent, you know?
Yeah, you're right, because I was trying to think of like, yeah, who does At the Drive-In remind me of, like, divorced from being in the time, right, and being, 20 years after this album came out and listening to it. It is just its own thing that doesn't have like any other, nothing sounds like this album.
Right. And like just going to the name of the band itself, like it's taken from a Poison lyric.
Yeah.
Like
At
this
the
is like,
drive-in.
right. It's like, this is one of the most uber self-serious, like militaristically touring post-hardcore bands that has ever existed. And their lyric is from like their title, the name of their band is a lyric from a glam rock song. Like it's that kind of like dichotomy, that like cognitive dissonance that just makes them stand out from everything else. Like they're just truly on their own shit all the time, and that's just what's so great about them.
Then so that is
That's
Relationship of Command. We did it! Yay!
Yay!
Yeah, so final thoughts on this album after talking about it and listening to it again and just going through everything.
I've listened to this album a lot the past couple of days, because not only was I getting ready for this, but also this is like such a nerdy thing to say, I'm on a black metal Discord.
Yeah.
And there's a ongoing weekly thread on it right now where all these well-meaning black metal people are trying to get people into like older hardcore. Okay. Because there's a lot of people in the server that just have no perception of like hardcore as it existed in the 90s and 2000s. Mm-hmm. And we actually were just talking about this album on the Discord, because we've moved on to the post-hardcore section of this discussion. So I'm getting like a real double dose of it right now in my life. And I will say I've probably listened to this album, including today, like 6 or 7 times in the past week.
Dang.
And I love it every time. I still do. And as I told you on Instagram, there was a time in my life when I was first getting introduced to it that I listened to it probably every day for at least a year. You know, like it's an album that I can count on one hand, like the albums that have done this for me. It's an album that I was legitimately borderline obsessed with.
Yeah.
And, I'm significantly older than I was when I first heard it, and I have had a multitude of life experiences that have made me a much different person than I was when I first was introduced At the Drive-In, and I can still confidently say that I think it fucking rules.
Well, and you're not alone with that. There are many, many people who agree with you. And I love the fact that you can, like, now, this many years later, listen to it 6 times in a week, and then again on, some asshole's podcast and be like, this album fucking rules. Hell yeah, At the Drive-In.
Yeah, and, there's so many albums that I loved around the same time that I go back and try to revisit as a fun little exercise as an adult that I just can't stand anymore, even if I don't actively dislike them now, it's like the luster has certainly like very much worn off for me in the years. But this is not one of them. This is one of those rare albums that maybe I don't love it in the same way as I did when I was a kid. I certainly don't, but I don't love it any less. Like I still can throw it on like in a mix with albums that I've discovered in the last year or two, and it fits right in my like enthusiasm about it.
I love that quote right there. I don't love it in the same way, but I don't love it any less. That's fucking awesome, dude.
That's true. Like when I was a kid and I heard this shit, like I was 13 or 14 years old, and I'm not saying I'm wrong for thinking this, but I would like, I thought it was just like a truly like like almost biblical experience listening to this thing. Like,
yeah, you don't understand why people don't feel the same thing that you feel when you listen to it, right? Yeah.
And I would read reviews of it, and there was like a Pitchfork review or something where they gave it like a 5.4. That's gonna be really funny if that was the exact score they gave it, and I still remember that. But they gave it like a 5.4, and the review was just like this very snarky takedown about just how like pretentious and annoying this album is. And it wasn't that I was mad at them about the review. It was that I truly could not understand like how anybody could not hear what I was hearing with this record. And now I listen to it and I absolutely can understand why somebody wouldn't like it. You know, that's not lost on me whatsoever. But it doesn't. Even if I don't have the same like histrionic affection for it that I did when I was a child, I still love it on its own merits. You know, I still love it for what it is and how I still truly think it's like a album that has not only stood the test of time, but in a lot of ways, like almost gotten better for me.
And good albums do that. And I hope that people that haven't heard this album yet will go and listen to it off of your enthusiasm. And people that haven't spun it in a while will go and spin it 6 times in a week because they haven't listened to it in the last decade and they forgot how fucking good it is.
Hell yeah, me too.
All right. Well, Alex, thank you so much, dude, for agreeing to hop on and for listening to some music with me, telling some stories, and just having a cut up and being a pal and being a dude, man.
Dude, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. And I also will say, as an aside, check out the other At the Drive-In records too. Acrobatic 10-minute, the first one, In Casino Out, the second one, they've got an EP called Via in there somewhere. Mm-hmm. It's all great. They've got like demos and early 7 inches out there. I'm sure they're all on YouTube. There's a great one called Hell Paso. One of those rare bands that I really feel like has a flawless discography. There's peaks and valleys, but
there's the 2017 one that you said that was shit. So like, yeah, we won't talk about that one. We'll exclude that one.
All right, so we won't say. I actually, in this moment, I forgot that the reunion album even existed. So.
Well, I was going to say I did not, so I was going to say like everybody listen to all of the other ones before you go and listen to what is the other one called? Inter Alia?
You know, that to me is perfect because it just perfectly encapsulates how little I think about this album, that it doesn't even register to me as an official At the Drive-In album.
You literally were talking about it 30 minutes ago and then just forgot that it existed because of how much you dislike it.
Their discography ends with a relationship with Command. They broke up and that was it. They never got back together. They never released any other music. So no, they don't have a flawless discography. I'll walk that back. But if you place your own artificial boundaries on their discography, and you say that their career ended after the release of Relationship with Command, their discography is pretty unfuckable, I would say. Those 3 albums in the EP are just fantastic, and I would highly encourage anybody with even a remote interest in weirdo hardcore or post-hardcore before that term meant, like, don't listen to this band. The golden era of post-hardcore, like, check that stuff out because there's a lot of really great music there.
Stamp of approval from Alexander Jones on the At the Drive-In discography, minus 2017. We'll do the X Games like judging on that. You know, they always throw out the worst run that everyone has. So just like, well, for purposes of album discography talks, we'll throw out the worst one and then average it from there from now on.
We'll come back for episode 100. And we'll do a review of Inter Alia.
I love that. I'm writing that down right now, and it's going to happen. And we're going to be like 2 songs into it. And you're like, oh, what the fuck did I do? I got to sit through this whole thing again. God damn it. You heard him, everyone. Episode 100. Alex is going to be back to listen to Inter Alia as long as he hasn't forgotten about its entire existence in the next 10 minutes. But hey, once again, massive shout out to Alexander Jones for lending his time to the pilot episode of Spinning the Wax. And I also want to give a shout out to my Undeath champion shorts that I picked up when the band were in Nashville with Sanguisugabog. The comfiest shorts in all of the land, and they'll have to pry them off my cold dead ass after I expire. Anyway, go check out Undeath's 3rd full-length album, More Insane, available October 4th on Metal Blade Records. It's likely to be one of the best death metal albums that you've heard in 2024. Also, let me know what you thought about At the Drive-In and Relationship of Command. Had you heard the album before? Do you have any huge memories tied to it? Were you as obsessed with the album as Alex was? Shoot an email over to spinningthewax@gmail.com, and I will share some of those stories at a later episode. That's all I have for this one today. Thank you all so much for listening to this first episode of this project. You can give us a follow on socials and everywhere else at Spinning the Wax. You can follow me at staypuffed_Malo. And if you like what you heard and want more of it or want to support the show in any way, head over to our Patreon pages or our Patreon page or our Buy Me a Coffee page, where you can get early access to episodes, full and uncut versions of these interviews, curated playlists, new music updates weekly, live streams, and more. Granted, I know money is tight for everyone, so of course, if you can't do that, the biggest thing that you can do for this show is to spread the word. Right now, especially as we're just starting out. Any share or like is huge, and definitely let your heavy metal obsessed friends know where they can listen to us, which is anywhere you can get your podcasts. All right, thank you so much again, everybody. We will see you next time when Harriet's Debbie Go brings on Rhea by Oathbreaker. Until then, my friends, stay safe and stay sane, stay heavy, stay puffed.